This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Hey, Jason, this is Scott Crook. I was on the Empowered Investor Zoom call last night and just so thankful for the value that's created inside that group. And, you just consistently bring subjects that are so important and relevant to what I'm needing and I believe other investors need. So thank you so much. I appreciate you and all that you've done for helping us become better investors. Thanks, man.
Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode 2173, and we continue to talk about the housing shortage. So check this out. According to a new Zillow study, there is a housing shortage which is most acute in San Francisco. But does that mean you'd want to invest in San Francisco? Of course not. That would be a terrible market in which to invest. However, it is interesting because the housing shortage there is missing. This is the way they did the survey. They figured the number of missing housing units per person. And in San Francisco, for every 30 people, there is one missing housing unit. And in the United States in general, there is one missing housing unit for every 74 people. But you can't just go by something like that because you have to consider, of course, the price, the landlord friendliness, all of the other factors that we talk about so much. However, I just thought you would think that's interesting. We're going to take a deep dive into this survey on another episode coming up. But today, we are continuing our discussion with Ivor Cummins. So let's go to that.
I mean, even though that was all technically on the record, everyone forgot it. And they all, Mr. Putin bad, Orange Man bad. I mean, this is the problem. With the ownership of the media, you can brainwash otherwise smart people to strenuously believe any nonsense. It is quite scary what they can do with their media ownership.
Yeah. Well, not to mention the tech companies, but go ahead.
Oh, shocking. But Rockefeller Special Studies Project, the 5 Rockefeller brothers got together, an absolute ton of money. Nelson Rockefeller, who went on to be the vice president, these are big connected guys. And they brought in Henry Kissinger because they identified him as being a really useful individual. And he proved to be. I mean, look at Kissinger's career. He's Rockefeller's boy. And they said we cannot escape and indeed should welcome the task which history has imposed on us. They got all this from John Dee, the father. This is the task of helping to shape a new world order in all its dimensions, spiritual, economic, political, social. So you can see here the sheer fascism, right? They're nice words, but these guys are not holding back. They want to reshape the whole world, a new world order. And this was printed, but the media didn't obviously comment and say, hold on, who are these turkeys? Because the media were bought. But their challenge, they said, was to build a new world structure which will make possible the fulfillment of the basic purposes of humanity. So now you're talking about ultra-rich children of Big Daddy Oil Man are deciding they're going to build a new world order to make possible the fulfillment of the basic purposes of humanity. Now, that should tell you in retrospect that these guys are sick in the head. But the problem is, and I mentioned it shortly, they had the Trilateral Commission, the League of Nations, then the United Nations, and they had all these organizations that the world's leaders were part of. So unfortunately, these sociopaths had access to all of the world's leaders and had massive influence. And that was the problem. If they were just ordinary people with ordinary funding, maybe they'd torture some small animals or maybe even kill someone in a diner, and that'd be the end of it. But unfortunately, these guys had so much money and influence. Well, and here we are. And I just reminded there in the slide for people who are listening, for the fascist, everything is the state. Nothing human or spiritual exists, much less as value outside the state. It's totalitarianism. That was Mussolini. And this is what they are saying in nice words. They want a totalitarian world order. And really quickly, Council of Foreign Relations, immensely powerful organization with all the who's who of presidents and world leaders and influencers in it. David Rockefeller from 1970 to 85, in the most critical period, was the chair of that. And they identified in the 70s global health, climate, human resources, resources of the world as opportunities, because they very cleverly realized if we're going to get a global new world order, we need to convince the people to get behind this global totalitarianism. So we're obviously going to need global hobgoblins and scare stories that are global in order to get people scared enough to say yes. And they identified pandemics, climate disaster, population bomb, and peak oil as opportunities. Before the scientists got on board, they already identified all the stuff we have to listen to painfully today on a whiteboard in a corporate back room.
So peak oil, the big theory from the 70s, that never happened. The complete opposite happened, to where we had massive amounts of oil, thanks to technology being able to extract it. And then Al Gore, in his younger days, he was running around scaring people about the coming ice age.
Yeah. It's so funny. Time magazine featured that. You see, what happened is the temperature was naturally rising from the 1800s up to the 50s. And that's just natural. It's coming out of the little ice age. And it's a natural phenomenon. It's based on the Malkovich cycles, or not Malkovich. Oh, I forget the pronunciation. And the sun and, solar energy and cosmic rays even, and the position of the Earth in our solar system. So there's all these factors that define the average temperature. That's just nature. But the temperature was rising. They got excited about global warming, figuring they could put a narrative onto it, like rain dance men or snake oil salesmen. But then in the 60s and 70s, naturally, even though the CO2 was going through the roof, the temperature naturally leveled off and flattened. And the scientists began to talk about potentially an increase in the ice age type challenge. And everyone went with it, including Time magazine. And I'm sure Rockefeller and all the rest of the guys were saying, oh, this is awkward. So they were quite quiet during the 70s and 80s because they don't know jack about science. So they're thinking, oh, this has ruined our narrative. And then later, the temperature began to tick up again naturally. And then they got back on plan. So they're not scientifically that knowledgeable. So they're just looking for an opportunity to take what's happening naturally and stick a narrative on it. That's all that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And it wasn't even a crisis, but they created a crisis where none existed. I've recommended this book many times on the show over the years, folks, and I would highly recommend it again. It's called The Bet. It's about Paul Ehrlich and Julian Simon and the gamble over Earth's future. And the author of The Bet, Paul Sabin, chronicles all of their media and all of the attention these two got battling it out about, Malthusian ideas that the population was going to destroy the world, and Ehrlich, and what he said and what Julian Simon said. And you just know what was right. I mean, the prediction from the environmental left was that we would have this massive scarcity, famine. In fact, they said people ought to stop effing. In other words, they didn't want to have any more kids, no more people, right? Because people are the scourge of the earth. And the complete opposite has happened. We have more abundance than ever. I mean, we have more food than ever. We have too much food. we have more abundance in every imaginable way. So again, it's amazing they can keep up with these narratives because they just keep losing. Like, anybody looking at this stuff objectively knows that their predictions have just been false, wrong. It's amazing, this alarmism. It just has been proven false so many times.
Well, absolutely, Jason. But the problem is the average man or woman in the street who's reading the media does not really get to see the obvious reality. They get fed the narrative, and as a result, they are deluded, just like we saw in COVID, people wearing masks in the car. I mean, how did that happen? It's absurd. But They know that, I mean, Goebbels, I think it was attributed to in National Socialist Germany back in the war, said, give me control of the media or the radio and I'll turn any nation into a nation of pigs. So they knew the power. If we hold the megaphone, we can just make black white, up, down. We can do anything with humans. And that's the sad reality. Now, these guys set up the Harvard International Seminar, and in conjunction with the Council of Foreign Relations and all the other influencers, they pulled together the who's who of world influencers. And it was funded by Ford Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation, of course. And it later transpired that the CIA had funded it too, which, of course, the State Department is going to have to be up to their neck in the future world government plan. So that's not a conspiracy theory. That makes sense. They identified Klaus Schwab, that we all know and love now, the WEF. But people need to understand that the Harvard seminar and Rockefellers created the WEF as a tool, right? They called it the European Management Forum in 1971. They identified the sociopath Klaus Schwab, like they identified Kissinger, and they said, hey, we can use you. You run the European Economic Forum. And in the 80s, it became the World Economic Forum. But, I mean, they simply create all these organs of control that they require to push their plan. No conspiracy theory. You know, it's corporate dominance of the sphere. That's all it is. And Barbara Ward, who set up the European Management Forum, one of the board, she was banging on about sustainable development because, of course, they realized, how do we get the people to worry about the future and to need us to help them? Well, we have to start talking about a future where the planet's in trouble and their children will be in trouble. Sustainability. So that became a centerpiece of World Economic Forum. Not economics, sustainability. And essentially, I'll finish with this, just absolutely, Jason, let you back in, but jump forward to today, World Economic Forum partners. These are only the primary funding partners out of around 400 corporates. But it just shows you now, you've got Ericsson, Goldman Sachs, Intel, Microsoft, IBM, JP Morgan, Citibank, MasterCard, Visa, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Open Society for Soros, Amazon, ABB, Chevron, Oil Money. That's just a handful of the top funding partners, right? The banks, big oil, and big pharma. They're up to their neck in it. And the last slide I'll touch on, I went to their website, still there, I think, but I made sure I captured it. And I'm just showing on the screen now all the corporations who are funding partners. And it's basically every big corporation.
Funding partners of the WEF, the World Economic Forum, right?
Yeah. And remember Mussolini, and this is crucial, fascism is corporatism. It is the unifying of corporate and government power. You're looking at it. World Economic Forum is funded by all the major corporates, hundreds. And that is by definition fascism if they get in bed with government and influence policy. Guess what? They're not just influencing policy. They're managing to carry off pandemics. They're carrying off world pandemic treaties. They're carrying off a move to 15-minute cities. So the corporate kind of head of the snake is basically beginning to become the government. And I think increasingly, I don't know what you think, Jason, but there's a phrase came out recently, puppeticians. And in Ireland, for sure, clear as crystal in the last few years, our politicians are puppeticians. Overwhelmingly, they implement WEF, UN, EU policy, and they literally urinate on what the voters want. Every time what the voters want comes up in polls, the government do the opposite. They are clearly reporting up to the corporate mothership.
Yeah, it's truly unbelievable. And, you know, we had Vivek Ramaswamy, the presidential candidate, on the show a while back. And he, of course, wrote the book Woke Inc., which is an interesting parallel to everything you're saying, because all of these same corporations are on board with this whole ideology that just distracts from all the evil stuff they're doing, all the pollution they're causing, all of these sweatshops they're running. It's just a total distraction. It's the ultimate fake virtue signaling. It's truly incredible. It really, really is. I got another meme for you. Okay. And maybe I'll get this on the screen. But this one, I just took a screenshot on my phone yesterday, and it's a picture of good old Bill Gates. Okay. And it says,
when a guy has enough money to end world hunger, end poverty, regenerate the soil, and clean the oceans, and instead he chooses to pump his money into GMO mosquitoes, blocking out the sun, because they're concerned about the warming, right? Creating fake meat, and most importantly, producing toxic vaccines for 7 billion people, you have to ask yourself, why? Why is that where his attention goes? Why is that where his money goes? It's just shocking.
It is, Jason, and it is a frustration for me, to be honest, that I have very educated friends in senior positions who semi-cancelled me, and now actually they're kind of dawning on them that I was correct on everything, but I don't care. I'm fine with being cancelled. But because they're in senior positions and they're reading the newspaper of record on their desks every morning, it's practically ironed and put on their desk, and they're watching the main TV channels, the official government ones, their heads are so full of propaganda, they really cannot believe that it's all utter nonsense. But slowly they're beginning to realize, and there's an awakening happening. But you're right, that Gates thing. I mean, one guy commented way back, it was so funny. Gates was brought to the Supreme Court for megalomania in the antitrust action.
Right, in the 90s.
Footage shows him nodding rhythmically. And just watch him, and you would say, I don't want that guy near anything that influences anything.
And he's referring to the Bill Gates deposition, which went very badly when he was being deposed in the Microsoft antitrust case over the forced use of their lousy browser. It's just truly unbelievable. What we have to realize is these people are basically criminals who have gotten away with their crimes. And if you get big enough, you can buy virtue. And that's what they're doing, right? But, for those who think this is an outlandish conspiracy theory or something like that, look, this is really not a big deal. I mean, since the beginning of time, the people with more power or more money or more influence or more physical strength, they used their resources to have more influence. I mean, there's nothing new here. This has happened since the beginning of the time. I mean, grow up. Is it any surprise that, Klaus Schwab and the Bidens and the Bushes and all of the central figures of our world are using their power? I mean, does that surprise anybody? It shouldn't.
Exactly. And that's the key point. And I often say in my interviews that humanity has gone through cycles into totalitarianism and, despots and terrible times driven by the elite few and suffered greatly. And then at some point they rebel. And then you get an egalitarian, kind of fair society and everyone's happy. But then they get soft and they think everything's fine. Right. And they forget there's a percentage of humanity who are always striving to get to the top and run an ant farm. So what happens is you end up back in totalitarianism. And this has happened in cycles forever. Forever. Right. From the Roman Empire, Shaku Zulu in Africa. Doesn't matter where in the world, humans are humans. So we now have gone through a huge softening since World War II. And now the people after 3 generations out of World War II, especially with phones and all the modern luxuries we have in the West, they've become soft as puppy poo, basically. And as a result, they're absolutely ripe to be taken over by the hard guys, the totalitarians like Schwab and the Rockefellers. It's inevitable. So now we're going into this fourth turning and we're heading into totalitarianism. And, we'll come through that in coming decades and we'll get back to egalitarian good societies. But we're going to have to go through the fire.
Here's the problem, though. Here's the problem. The longer we allow these power grabs to happen, and the more power they grab, the harder the struggle to get out of it. One of the things that made the U.S. so great is the checks and balances of the 3 branches of government. And before those were all co-opted like they are now, largely, you really could run a pretty balanced society as long as you had a large middle class and this whole idea of, rugged individualism and all the things that made the U.S. the sort of beacon of freedom for the world. But, sadly, it's been turning the other way for quite a while, certainly since the 60s. I would say that was a big part of it. And if you read any of Seyfried Amos's work, he wrote the Bitcoin standard and he wrote the fiat standard and then, fiat food which you'd be interested in, right? And, we've got all of these sort of fiat things, and that word fiat just means by authority, by decree, right? It's
government.
It's valuable because we said it's going to be, right? And these are all fake. They're not real, right? And they can con all of us for a while as long as people will play the game, but at some point the jig is up, and it's up on everything. We're being poisoned with the fiat food. The fiat money is inflating away everybody's wealth. It's destroying the middle class. It's concentrating wealth because of the Cantillon effect into the small elite class. It's really scary stuff. So what's your advice as we wrap it up today? I know we're going to do a whole nother session about what you can do about it, but maybe just give us a sliver of hope here before you go today.
Well, yeah, the thing is that, and absolutely what you just said, Jason, I mean, because of technology, I think that this cycle, even though there have been many, I think the guys at the top in this cycle reckon with massive technology, surveillance, like I think China now has a really good ant farm, and it's almost impossible to rebel because they have 350 million cameras.
Even in Hong Kong, it's impossible to rebel, which is crazy, And two of the British judges just resigned in Hong Kong because you can't defeat the power of the CCP. They're just too powerful. Yeah,
and I mean, there's a great case in point. I'll say a negative story now, and then we'll finish with a positive one, absolutely. But around a few months ago, China, they do allow their citizens to peacefully hold up placards outside a business who has mistreated them. They allow a little bit of steam to release. But there was a bank that froze millions of dollars in Chinese businessmen's assets. I'm not sure the details, but the government must have been in support because a bunch of businessmen agreed on a Friday to go to the local town and to protest peacefully about this freezing of accounts. Mm-hmm. And on Friday night, all their phones went COVID red and they could not move. So technology can be used to snuff out rebellion almost before it starts. And I think this current kind of variant, COVID variants, this current variant of totalitarians that have got together with the Rockefeller Brothers up till today and all their clubs like, Bilderberg and all of WEF, I think they reckon, they always talk about technology, they reckon we'll make it stick. You remember Hitler said 1,000-year Reich? Well, he got beaten and he didn't have any 1,000-year Reich. He ended up committing suicide in a bunker. Yeah. But I think these guys reckon, hey, we can maybe have 1,000-year Reich, because technology will stop the ants rebelling. So that's the negative note. And they've got a point, but I don't think it's going to work. The positive note is there was the Road to Geneva march just last weekend when we were in Orlando at the conference. Buses and people from all over Europe went to Geneva to highlight the UN and the WHO pandemic treaty. Enough is enough. We have freedom groups all over the world now gaining huge support, from RFK through to all the other medical freedom groups, and then all the legal people who are fighting against the EU communisto system. And we have a public awareness, I think. So in Ireland recently, it was a very important moment. They tried to change our constitution, which protected women and mothers and families. And the wording, I'm honest with you, Jason, the wording wasn't like old-fashioned. It was written 100 years ago. The wording could have been written yesterday. It was perfectly good that because the state is dependent on the health of the family, and the family is society, the state will absolutely strive that no mother has to, through economic hardship, leave the children behind to work out of hardship. Not that the state wants the woman in the house, but the state must help a woman who would leave and abandon the kids due to economic hardship. This is perfect. This is perfectly sensible, right? But the government tried to bring in changes based on NGO lobbying and, of course, the UN and WEF, all those guys. And they wanted to take all that protection of the family out of the Constitution and put in that we respect any durable relationship. Durable relationship. So replace the family, marriage, the whole of society with any durable relationship. So it's clearly rotten. Now, the interesting thing was the government, all the government politicians were screaming for a yes vote to get this disgraceful change through. All the NGOs were screaming for it. And all of our mainstream media were screaming for yes. So you'd say, well, if everyone and all the experts are saying yes, probably the sheeple voted yes, but they didn't. We got the biggest no vote in the history of referendums in Ireland. So the people now do not understand what we're saying. Most of them don't know what is wrong, but they know something's really wrong.
Right. Yeah.
That's a start. And they threw it back. And a whole load of politicians, including our prime minister, effectively, left office in the next couple of weeks. So there's big awareness happening.
Yeah. And you're calling politicians puppeticians, like puppets, you mean, when you say that? I just want to clarify
absolutely.
that. Yeah.
I didn't make up that phrase, but Jason, I love it. Puppeticians.
Oh, no, it's a great way to put it.
There's so few genuine statesmen or stateswomen. Yeah. Overwhelmingly, they're butt puppets of the UN, WEF, EU. I mean, they just take their orders from the top on all issues.
They should be forced to wear patches on their suits that show who their sponsors are. That should be a required disclosure. I mean, look, when you see a race car driver in his uniform, it's got the logos of all the companies that sponsor him, right? That's how politicians should be. They should be forced to do the same thing. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's something else. All right. Well, Ivor, thank you for this great education. I'm really looking forward to part 2 with you, and it's going to be great. So we will get that scheduled and we'll get it out to you here in the near future, folks. Give out your website or whatever resources you want to share with people, social media, whatever it is, wherever you haven't been deplatformed yet.
Well, actually, because I reference everything I've said, and even with the New York Times attacking me on YouTube, I'm still on all the platforms, which is quite amazing. I was off LinkedIn for a year and a half for doing a funny video, personal video with my voiceover about Tony Blair. It wasn't even against the COVID regulations. So it just shows you the corruption. But I'd say just Google my name, Ivor Cummins. My YouTube and my Twitter I'm most active on rather than my website. And I think the links to my Vimeo of the 2 talks I gave in Dubai last month will give people a great, more deeper overview of all of this stuff.
Okay, excellent. Sounds good. Well, Ivor, thank you for joining us. You can be followed on X, one of the last free speech platforms, and then all the other places you mentioned as well. If you send us those links, we'll put them in the show notes for your Dubai talks. Okay, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.